Hello, fellow birders. My name is Dennis Kania. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at house finch and purple finch. On the DuPage Birding Club Education channel, we'll be talking about all things bird related. And as I mentioned, we'll be looking closely at house finch and purple finch. So here are records collected at Fermilab over the last 33 years, and you can see house finch is with us throughout the entire year. So from January all the way through December. You can see in the earlier survey periods here, this one reflecting 1987 to 1991, our records are a little bit more sporadic, and there'll be more on that in just a little bit. Purple finch, you can see in the spring season, we have very sporadic appearances of this bird at Fermilab. Our fall records are much more concentrated, and so you can see that generally in October through the second half or the first half of November, we'll have purple finches around. And so we don't have quite as much data as we'd like to for Fermilab, so I did take a look at eBird to see what kind of abundances we were seeing at various sites. So I checked a few things like Green Valley, the Arboretum, Pratt Swain Woods, Follersburg Woods, and all of those do indicate the same kind of pattern where it's very weak structure to the spring records and then more of a heavy concentration in this part of the year here in October. So this is very consistent with what we're seeing across the rest of the county. So I wanted to go back in history a little bit here. I had a funny episode in one of my Arboretum classes one time. One of my students was insisting that she was seeing purple finches all the time at her feeders, and I had just talked about the fact that we don't actually get a lot of purple finch records, and the graphs I just showed you bore that out. So I wanted to review the species with her, and so she opened up her field guide, and lo and behold, this is kind of what I saw. This wasn't the exact field guide that she showed me, but this is a good example. So this is a field guide of the birds of eastern United States by Roger Torrey Peterson. This was published in 1947. And you can see, looking here, our only option is purple finch. Well, that's exactly what her field guide showed as well. So as far as she was concerned, house finch is not even a candidate. Any little reddish finch you saw like this was going to be a purple finch. So to take it one step further, looking at this field guide, this one is again in the Peterson field guide series. It's the Eastern Birds, and this is from 1980. And it shows quite a different thing going on. That previous field guide, by the way, did not have any range maps, so I couldn't share that with you. But here it shows that there's a point of release in 1940 right here in New York. And they're showing a dashed line that shows the expansion of this species moving westward. Well, what happened a long time ago, in leading up to 1940, house finches on the West Coast were being trapped and sold in the bird trade in pet shops as Hollywood finches. So people were buying these up. And of course, already by that time, we already had the Migratory Bird Treaty Act in place that came into effect in actually 1918. And so we're talking about 1940. Well, there was not much in the way of enforcement going on, obviously. So around that time in 1940, people with National Audubon were becoming aware of the fact that these birds were being trapped on the West Coast and sold in pet shops on the East Coast. So they were starting to put some pressure on government agencies to do something about this. And at that time, the pet trade started to get worried, and so they just released all the birds that they had in stock. So all those birds created this little nucleus of breeding birds right here in New York. And so over time, they started to expand westward. And I think that this range map here, this dashed line that Peterson has, is a little bit on the generous side, because I can recall that when I first started birding in 1984, in eastern DuPage County, I could on occasion run across house finches, but in the western half of the county, I never saw any house finches. So we were right on the cusp of these birds as they were moving across the state. And As far as I know, the very first record of house finch breeding, a confirmed breeding record for Illinois, was in 1985. So we were right on the cusp of these birds when I started birding. It was right when they were just starting to move through the state. So I think it's very interesting to know this. You can see the purple finch range map here would always have included Illinois and certainly DuPage County. So if we look at range maps today, these are from Cornell Lab, you can see that the house finch here has moved all the way across the United States. You know, they're in this range here in the Great Plains. It looks like we've got some difficulty with them hanging on, but they do make this connection through here, and traditionally you wouldn't have seen them in this part of the West. So they've basically now covered the entire continent. The purple finch range map is still roughly the same. So let's take a look at house finch, and here we have a male, and let's look at some of the features that would help us to separate them out from purple finch. First of all, let's look at the bill. It's not a very large bill. It is a finch type bill, but notice the upper edge of the bill. That's called a culmen, and you can see that there's quite a turn in the, as you get closer to the tip, you can see quite a turn in that bill. That's evident in several of these examples. Not the angle of this bill doesn't really reflect it too well, but you can see it well here in this close-up. You can see there's definitely a downward curve to that upper edge of the bill, which is the culmen. So that would be one thing to look at. Another thing would be the streaking. You can see that there's a lot of streaking in the breast of this bird, and that streaking does carry on all the way down into the undertail coverts. So you can see some streaks interspersed in the undertail coverts here. So even though it does have this reddish breast, reddish face to it, which might make you think purple finch, it does have all of this streaking going on. It does have this different shaped bill. I do have this individual shown here just to show you just how much variability there can be. Some of the birds will be red, even redder than this. And although I've never seen one quite this yellow, I have seen some that are very orangey yellow, getting close to this coloration right here. So be aware that there can be some variation in that color. Here we have the female, and you can see overall she just looks like she has a very dirty gray face. And in reality, if you look at this close-up, you can see it's a series of very fine gray streaks. But all coming together, you get that pattern that just looks like a gray face, very, very plain looking. And she too has a lot of streaking on the breast, and those streaks do in fact go all the way down into the undertail coverts. Here's our purple finch, and you might be able to tell that you're dealing with purple finch just because the red is somewhat different. It's a richer, rosier red, but I wouldn't count on making your identification solely on that. If you look at the bill, pretty much the same shape bill, so it's a finch bill, but much straighter on the culmen. You can see that in this close-up as well. Very, very straight looking compared to what we just saw on that house finch. You can see that there's kind of a little modeling of streaks going on the upper breast here, and these are, in this individual, they're very reddish looking. Sometimes they'll be a little more brownish looking than that, and they can extend down the flank. But when you do get down to the undertail coverts, they should be completely clean on the male. Here's our female, and this example helps show another feature that I like to look at, is that the head of purple finch seems to be larger looking than what we saw on house finch. Again, that straight culmen. The pattern in the face is way different than what we were seeing in the female house finch. You can see there's this white supercilium. You can see the ear coverts are dark. There's a submustachial area here that's very, very white, and then we get down to a dark malar area here. The throat is also fairly, at least streaky, so it looks darker. Does have a heavy streaking on the breast again, and if you do get down to the undertail coverts, you may find a couple streaks here. But you're not going to even have to look that far, because just that facial pattern alone is going to be enough to confirm your identification of this as a female purple finch. You can see that pattern again here: darkish crown, whitish supercilium, dark ear coverts, submustachial area that is white, and then dark in the malar, and then even into the throat area. So you get this pattern of dark, light, dark, light, dark, and that pattern is very easy to pick up on. So here we have the males side by side, just for one more comparison, and you can see again there is kind of a rosier look to the reds on this particular individual. than you see on this one. Both of them are reflecting some streaking here. As I mentioned, you could have streakings coming further down and the streaks will be more diffused and brownish. And you do see that in this individual where they're darker here. And they do make it all the way down into the undertail coverts on this house finch. And again, the undertail coverts for the purple finch will be all white. I mentioned the bill earlier on. It'll look straighter here, certainly more curved on this individual. Look at the back, you'll see that this individual's back looks a little grayish. And if we look at the back of the purple finch, we can expect to see more red showing up all through the back here. If we get all the way down to the rump, we will find that both individuals are kind of reddish there. But the upper back is the key thing to look at to see just how extensive the red is. Another finer point that you might take into consideration if all these other things are failing you and you're just looking for something else to confirm your identification, and that would be to look at the primary projection. And that's something we've talked about in some previous videos. And as a review, the secondaries kind of create a line here because they're all the same length. And then as our primaries get progressively longer, they end up with the tip being all the way out here. So that difference from the tip of your primaries back to the tips of the secondaries is called your primary projection. And if we compare the primary projection of this purple finch to this house finch, you'll see that it is longer on the purple finch. Because here's, it's hard to see the secondaries here, but we can see our last tertial, which is about where the secondaries are going to be ending as well. So that's right here, and here's our longest primary from this wing. This other feather is coming across the back from the other wing. So we want to look at this one right down here. And so you can see that primary projection is much shorter than what we're dealing with here. But you should be able to come up with other features aside from that that'll help you make your identification. But it's always good to have more than one way to figure out what these birds are. So in the simplest terms, separating the females should be fairly easy based just on that face pattern. The house finch has that very plain, dirty looking gray face, and purple finch has a very interesting pattern with alternating white and dark areas. The males can be a little trickier, but the most obvious difference would be to look at those undertail coverts, which on purple finch should be nice, clean, and white, and the house finches, they will have some streaks. And there are other features that you can use to solidify your identification, including the relative head size, which appears larger on purple finch. The line that's created by the upper culmen, which is curved on house finch and straighter on the purple finch. The back color should appear more reddish on purple finch and grayish on the house finch. And last but not least, the primary projection is certainly longer on the purple finch. So thanks for taking the time to view this video. Hopefully we have given you some bird food for thought. And I hope you'll join us again in the future as we explore all things bird related.